Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is September 29th. This is a continuance of our weekly agenda that we did yesterday. We will start today's proceedings with a roll call.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman?
Present.
Commissioner Bowe? Commissioner Cross?
Present.
Commissioner McGowan?
Here.
Commissioner Mesner?
Here.
Commissioner Oath? Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great, and that is a quorum. We have 2 matters left on our agenda from yesterday. First is the continued work on docket number 2109-00156, the Noble Energy OGDP number 1 oil and gas development plan. We left this yesterday with instruction to our Attorney General Mercer to work with Attorney Jill Fulcher on some language that I had requested concerning the length of the permit term and the potential for reevaluating best management practices if it is not drilled here in the near stage. So with that, and then I know we also we had initiated deliberations, but we had not concluded deliberations. And I know that perhaps some other commissioners might have some other matters that they would like to discuss. So taking it sequentially, AG Mercer, could you please inform the commission and our stakeholders, as well as the applicant, where things might rest with regard to the requested COA BMP that I had requested?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was able to work yesterday evening and this morning with Ms. Fulcher to come up with language that is acceptable to both parties that could be added to the application as a best management practice. I'm going to share my screen here so that everybody can see that language. So there are 2 versions, one for the pads and one for the production facility. Would you like me to read it aloud?
Sure.
So for the pad locations, so first of all, the understanding between the parties is that the order, should it be the commission's wish to approve this OGDP, the order would state that the OGDP is valid for the initial term of the Wells Ranch CDP as set forth in Order 1-241. And then we would add these proposed BMPs to cover the concerns that you discussed yesterday. And so the pad location BMP says, if drilling and completion operations are not commenced on the location by October 1st, 2025, Noble will review the best management practices and mitigation plans and attachments to determine if revisions to the best management practices are necessary to further protect and minimize impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. The outcome of Noble's review, including any proposed revisions to the Form 2A, will be made through a Form 4 sundry notice submitted to the OGDP ID number and will be subject to review and approval by the Commission within 30 days of filing the Form 4 sundry. Approval of this Form 4 sundry notice does not relieve the operator from submitting all required Form 42 field operations notices and Form 4 sundry notices for subsequent operations when required. And then the one for the A7-8 facility is substantially the same as the one that I just read.
Okay, very good. And turning to Ms. Fulcher. Ms. Fulcher, is your client in agreement with this language?
We are, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. And so I just to comment ever so slightly on the language, the way this language reads and the intent here is that it allows the operator, if it is drilling and completing wells past the 3 years, there's a requirement to review the best management practices as against the then current best management practices, right? And then propose to the commission additional or alternate best management practices that would govern the operation down the road. This also gives the commission a 30-day window within which to, if it reviews it and believes that those practices are appropriate, then it does not need to take any action. Those practices would then become part of the permit. If it reviews it and believes that there ought to be some discussion with the applicant about the proposed best practices, we could call it up for hearing. We also obviously would have the director and our staff help us in that review for sure. Is that a fair additional summary, AG Mercer, of what you guys contemplated in drafting what I was asking you to draft?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Ms. Fulcher, is that record seem accurate as well?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from commissioners on this point? Okay, seeing none, would open it back up for deliberation from commissioners on other matters relevant to our consideration of Noble's OGDP number 1. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was hoping that the operator would be amenable to a conversation about, and I've talked to other operators in the past. So in your presentation, you had a good summary of emissions reductions and vehicle miles reductions, which are useful for our cumulative impacts report. I'm wondering if we can add a BMP to work with our staff to figure out how to reflect that so we can get it into our cumulative impacts report. So working on staff on agreeing to what those emissions reductions are so we can tabulate them as part of our annual cumulative impacts report. That's my first ask. And then the second is, I think if I understood the conversation yesterday, the benefit also from this proposal from a beneficial cumulative impacts perspective is the fact that these wells are going to get P&A'd on an accelerated schedule than if they had not been a part of this proposal. And I'm wondering if the operator is willing to submit some sort of a schedule to the commission so we know what the timeline is for those.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you for that, Commissioner McGowan. With respect to working with staff to just, I think what I'm hearing from you is just updating your global kind of cumulative impacts assessments based on emissions reductions. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, I think staff has a way they're trying to collect the data. So if you could work with them and align with their data collection so that we have that as part of our.
Absolutely, of your cumulative impacts assessment. I think that will be fine. I want to, of course, confirm with the client, but I think that should not be an issue at all. I mean, I think Noble would be happy to work with staff on updating that data so that your overall cumulative impacts read of these larger scoped areas is up to date and current. So I think that's absolutely fine. With respect to scheduling, like providing a schedule of the removal of these legacy wells, I think that might be a little bit more difficult to commit to for a variety of reasons. All of this is the plugging and abandonment will certainly be tied to when the wells are ultimately drilled and completed as well. So while that accelerates that whole process, it also makes it tricky still to put a timeline on that process. We heard a lot of testimony yesterday that these wells will be plugged in and abandoned, and I think that Noble is committed to that. But putting a timeline or schedule around when that will occur, I think becomes a little bit more difficult.
Will they all be P&A'd by the time you're done drilling all the wells and finalizing the production facility? Is that fair to say?
And apologies for there's a horn that I don't know if you're picking it up on your end, but there's a lot of activity on the street today. So apologies if you hear it. Let me confirm with the client. I think that, in the normal course, that plugging and abandonment would be happening, certainly prior to, bringing a well in line and completions. but I want to be careful that I'm not committing at the wrong time in the operation when that plugging and abandonment occurs. So if you all want to continue to deliberate, I can look to the client on that piece and then get some exact language back to you, or at least an exact answer as to when that happens.
Why don't we do this, Ms. Fulcher? Let me see if there are other issues from commissioners. Once we've identified all said issues, we'll give you a chance to huddle with your client and we'll take a quick break. Commissioner McGowan, did you have others?
Yeah, so I think staff, sorry, I was talking to staff a little bit about this. So I think that they need the well names and the API numbers, so that we know which ones are a part of this exact OGDP and which are going to be parts of future OGDP requests as part of my request also. Hopefully that should not be difficult to provide.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. I do want to quickly respond. My understanding is that some of that has already been provided at the request of staff. I think staff maybe had requested that of Noble within the last couple of weeks, and my understanding is that that has been provided or is being provided. So I think that there's no issue there.
Okay, great, thanks.
Other commissioners with thoughts, deliberative thoughts? All right, I'm seeing nothing further. Ms. Fulcher, 5 minutes to huddle with your client. Does that work?
Chair, if I could ask for 10, just in case the discussion goes a little longer, but I think 10 should do it. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's return at 1:23.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back. It is 1:24. We were giving Ms. Fulcher time to speak with the client concerning the proposed issue from Commissioner McGowan. Are you ready to talk with us?
I am. Thank you, Chair, and appreciate the 10-minute recess to speak with the client. So Commissioner McGowan, we've worked up some language that I'm going to read as slow as I can here to address your concern about commitments for the plugging and abandonment and removal of these legacy wells. So the language that we've struck here is legacy wells within each drilling and spacing unit in OGDP 1, which are operated by Noble, will be plugged and abandoned within 6 months of the date of first production of the final well drilled within each drilling and spacing unit. And so I'm going to just stop there and maybe give a little color. I don't have the map in front of me, but, or excuse me, in front of you, I have it, but I don't know that I can do the share screen on this. I suppose I can if it would be helpful. But just to remind you, there are 4 drilling and spacing units already approved in this OGDP 1. So we figured that it was probably simpler to tie the plugging and abandonment to development, horizontal development within each of those DSUs, and then also the legacy wells within each of those DSUs, because, you know, of course, we might be bringing the production on quicker in one area and still need the legacy wells up and running in like the southernmost portion of the OGDP. So that's how we figured it would all track together. In practical terms, a lot of these wells will probably be plugged and abandoned in a far shorter time frame, but some wells at the outsets of the unit area, it might be that we need to wait until the final well is producing before we can plug and abandon those legacy wells, so that we're continuously operating leases per private lease terms. So that would be the 6-month window that we're requesting. And then finally, I would note that the majority of the wells out here that we spoke about yesterday are operated by Noble. And again, we'll have all of those lists to the state. Again, I think that most of those lists have been submitted to staff, but we will provide all of those lists. So we can commit to, of course, plugging and abandoning Noble operated wells. We can't commit to, you know, plugging and abandoning third-party wells, but those wells will be evaluated as part of your state offset horizontal well policy and potentially plugged and abandoned through that process. So that was a little bit of color around the language, and hopefully that satisfies your concerns.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to know that there will be kind of a timeline that we're committing to. And then if you live in that area, you have assurances that that's going to get done too, that there's not just this additive thing that's occurring. And so I appreciate that. If my fellow commissioners are good with that, I am definitely.
I'm good with that approach. Thank you, Ms. Fulcher. Further, anything further with regards to deliberations from commissioners? All right, seeing no further deliberations, does anyone desire to craft a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to craft a motion. However, it's unclear to me what needs to be included, both with the language that you've proposed as well as the items that Commissioner McGowan has proposed.
And that's why we have magically appears our AAG to help commissioners out. I think we need to, the motion needs to explicitly state that the OGDP's life expansion is consistent with the original conceptual development plan approval. One, I think two, it needs to include reference to the language that Ms. Mercer showed us. And then I don't know, reference to the language shared by Ms. Fulcher. AG Mercer, do you care to weigh in?
Yes, I think everything, I agree with everything you just said. And I would also add a commitment, a BMP that the operator commits to work with staff to provide updated emissions reduction data for the cumulative impact report. So adding that to what you just said, I think we have, if that's the commission's will, we have enough for us. So moved.
So moved.
Do we have all right, we have a motion elegantly articulated by Commissioner Messner with a second from Commissioner Ackerman and/or Cross. Is there further discussion on the motion? The only further discussion, and this is kind of not for just Noble, but for all of our stakeholders, in particular those that are pursuing comprehensive area plans, is, you know, I want to echo the prudent remarks from Commissioner Ackerman yesterday. If you're seeking conceptual siting approval and you want that to then be used under 604B2, then we really do want to see, you know, a robust set of information so that we can add meaning to 604B2 later on down the road when we're looking at OGDPs. I felt like that was a very appropriate remark and instruction. And so I thought that it did make sense to sort of remind us all about that. So thanks again for that comment yesterday, Commissioner Ackerman. With that, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Again, big thanks to our staff for the years-long effort that went into this. Thank you, Rebecca. Fantastic job. And thank you, Ms. Fulcher, for the presentation between yourself and your panel.
Thank you very much, Chair and Commissioners.
All right. At this time, we will take up the last item on our agenda, which is docket 2203-00061, Weld County. It is a Crestone Peak Resources operating company proposed Shelton Oil and Gas Development Plan. And I will start the consideration of this. Normally we hear from Jason Maxey. Jason from Weld County. He's not able to be with us this afternoon. He did provide to commissioners written remarks. And if you guys are so kind, I will read them into the record so that all of our stakeholders are aware of Weld County's written remarks. Mr. Max is unable to attend the Shelton OGDP hearing today. Below, please find Weld County's comments in support of the Shelton OGDP. 1041 WOGLA 22-0002, the Shelton CPR 25 pad. Weld comments submitted 7/8/2022 and are reflected on the Form 2A. Case number 1041 WOGLA 22-0002 has been assigned to this location. OGED staff conducted a site visit on January 14th to evaluate not only the preferred location, but to drive the DA and look for other possible options that may be preferable to the applicant's proposed location. On January 19th, 2022, a pre-application meeting was held to discuss Crestone Peak's CPR's site analysis and specifics on the proposed location. This meeting included Crestone, OGED, COGCC, and Weld County Planning Department. CPW staff declined the meeting but stated no wildlife concerns with the proposed location. CPR, that is Crestone Peak Resources, submitted their 1041 WOGLA application to OGED on March 2nd, 2022. The application included an analysis of 4 alternative sites, which were reviewed and discussed in detail with OGED staff and the hearing officer. OGED staff had conducted another site visit on March 4th, 2022, and at the time confirmed no obvious incompatibilities with the proposed location. Referral requests were sent out to multiple agencies on March 23rd, 2022. OEGD did not receive any public comments or any applications for intervention. A 1041 WOGLA hearing was held on April 28th, 2022. The OGED hearing officer considered testimony at the 1041 WOGLA hearing and approved 1041 WOGLA 22-0002. The final order was recorded with Weld County Clerk and Recorder, reception number 4825403 in closed paren on May 6, 2022, and subsequently published in the Greeley Tribune on May 11, 2022, which creates a vested property right for this permit. From a land use perspective, this is a good location, close to other oil and gas development, close to a commercial / industrial type use, biogas plant, closed paren, and good access off of County Road 49. Weld County supports approval of this permit. Those are the comments from Jason Maxey, the Weld County in charge of their oil and gas development department. So with that, we do not have any public comment on the Shelton Oil and Gas Development Plan. So we now will turn to Crestone for its presentation. Ms. Fulcher.
Thank you, Chair, and good to stay with you, commissioners, on this Thursday afternoon. We've got a share screen we're going to pull up here for you in a moment, or what's happening here.
Hey, Ms. Fulcher, go ahead.
Okay. All right, thank you again, everyone. Again, Jill Fulcher with Beatty and Wozniak, representing Crestone Peak Resources Operating LLC in docket 2203-00061 before you today. This docket consists of an application to approve the Shelton 4 North 65 West OGDP. So we've nicknamed that the Shelton West OGDP, located in an unincorporated Weld County. And you just heard a little bit about that Weld County process from Mr. Maxey's remarks. And thank you, Chair, for reading those into the record. I'll provide you with a brief overview of this OGDP, and then I'm going to hand it over to our witnesses for a short presentation regarding the details of this OGDP. And then we've got several subject matter experts here to answer your questions following our presentation. The Shelton OGDP consists of approximately 1,610 acres of land in all or portions of sections 25 through 27 of Township 4 North, Range 65 West. The OGDP requests approval for the drilling of 16 new horizontal wells within an existing approved drilling and spacing unit from a single multi-well pad, being the Shelton CPR 25 pad. The CPR 25 pad and location, again, has been approved by Weld County, as you heard, and there are no proximate local governments to the CPR 25 pad or to the entirety of the Shelton West OGDP. As you'll hear from our witnesses today, the CPR 25 pad location is an optimal location for developing the Shelton West OGDP minerals in a manner that avoids and minimizes impacts to the public, to the environment, and to wildlife. First, the CPR 25 pad is a significant distance away from any receptors, with the closest residential building unit being almost 3,000 feet from the edge of the working pad surface. This is not in a disproportionately impacted community, and there are no high occupancy building units, schools, or childcare centers anywhere near this pad. The CPR 25 pad is also outside of high priority habitat and floodplains. And then finally, the CPR 25 pad does not come within or up gradient of any mapped or visible wetlands or riparian corridors. So no ALA was required for this pad, as it does not trigger any of the 304 B2B criteria. In addition to being sited in an optimal location and area for avoiding and minimizing impacts, Crestone will utilize several measures and best management practices to minimize and mitigate impacts to the public, to the environment, and to wildlife in operating this OGDP. Some of those, and you're going to hear about this today, would be lighting inspections and adjustments to take into account the proximity to Kersey Road, piping all produced oil to eliminate truck trips, applying dust minimizing fluids and controlling vehicles for speeds along access roads, installing secondary containment to protect groundwater, electrifying facilities and the rig, which will minimize noise and emissions. And then finally, full implementation of staff's condition of approval to employ some additional protections to potential nesting migratory birds should any be found on site. Finally, the OGDP complies with all substantive and procedural requirements of your rules. This application and the notice of hearing was provided to all interested parties under Rule 303E. And all of those parties were also notified when the OGDP passed completeness review, invited to post comments. And during that public comment period, only one public comment was received, and it was supportive of your approval of this project. We appreciate that the director and the staff have taken lots of time to review this project, and that we appreciate the back and forth and collaboration with staff. And the director has reviewed this OGDP and issued a recommendation for approval. So again, we appreciate your time today, and now I'm going to hand it over to Nathan Bennett.
Thank you, Ms. Fulcher. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Nathan Bennett. I'm the Director of Permitting and Compliance with Civitas Resources. Our presentation today will focus on the merits of the Shelton 4 North 65 West OGDP application. We intend to provide some background history, talk through our development plan and best management practices, and then lastly, request approval. As you are, in addition to myself today, Jeff Annable will be my co-presenter. And as Ms. Fulcher mentioned, we have several subject matter experts available for questions should you have any. As you are aware, Crestone Peak Resource Operating Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of Civitas Resources. Civitas and its associated subsidiaries have had 5 OGDPs reviewed and approved by this commission. Crestone Peak does maintain all financial assurances, insurance, and operator clearances with COGCC, and Crestone Peak will be the sole operator of the Shelton CPR 25 pad within the Shelton 465 West OGDP. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Annable for the next several slides.
Thank you, Nathan, and good afternoon, commissioners. It is a pleasure to speak with you again and present another Civitas application. I will start by covering the procedural background of the Shelton 4 North 65 West OGDP. Before you is an overview of the procedural history for the Shelton OGDP. I will touch on the major milestones, starting with the 30-day pre-application notice that was mailed out on February 8th, 2022, followed by the application submittal on March 22nd. After working through some completeness comments, our application was deemed complete on June 10th, 2022. During technical review, a public comment was received in support of our application. Lastly, we received Director Murphy's recommendation of approval on September 23rd, 2022. Next, I would like to touch on some general facts for the Shelton CPR 25 pad, the only pad proposed in this OGDP. It is located in the northeast-southeast of Section 25, Township 4 North, Range 65 West. This is a new oil and gas location. The nearby crossroads are County Road 47 and County Road 42. There are 1,610.97 acres included in this OGDP. We will be utilizing the existing drilling and spacing unit, order number 407-3095. It will contain a total of 16 new horizontal wells. There are no RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface, and the closest RBU is 2,835 feet as measured from the edge of working pad surface. We are not located in any high priority habitats or floodplains or adjacent to any disproportionately impacted communities. It does not trigger any COGCC Rule 304 B2B ALA criteria. And just want to say again that we did receive one public comment, and that was in support of the proposed application. Next, I would like to give a brief overview of the relevant local government approval and disposition as noted in Mr. Maxey's written comments. A pre-application consultation was held with Weld County in which COGCC staff was present, provided no major concerns with the proposed development. After the WOGLA notice was sent and the 1041 WOGLA application was submitted, a hearing date was held on April 28th, 2022 before the Weld County hearing officer. He concluded that with approval of our WOGLA permit, which was issued and recorded by Weld County on May 6th of 2022. Now I'd like to cover the community outreach and coordination that was held throughout the planning of this pad and OGDP. 1041 WOGLA notices were sent to all surface owners within 2,000 feet of the proposed disturbance area. And due to the remote nature of this location, only 6 surface owners were notified. Additionally, all required notices for the proposed OGDP were sent as required by COGCC rules. There are no applications for intervention or consultation requests received as a result of these notifications and associated public comment. To be as collaborative as possible with our neighbors, Crestone worked with Platte River Biogas and Chevron to utilize existing access points and road to reduce impacts to land that would be permanently disturbed. Next, I would like to touch on some general facts. Hold on. Next, I would like to touch on the anticipated timing of the development. We plan on beginning construction of the access road and pad in October of 2022, followed by drilling operations in November of 2022, and completion operations in April of 2023. Next, flowback and production will commence on October of 2024, followed shortly after by interim reclamation in March of 2024. Now I'd like to cover some cumulative impact mitigation and best management practices that we plan to utilize as a part of this development. First, I would like to cover the location siting. The Shelton CPR-25 pad is located greater than 3 miles from a disproportionately impacted community and greater than 1.5 miles from the nearest high priority habitat. It is sited outside of sensitive area for water resources. As you can see in the map below, the nearest high priority habitat is aquatic native species conservation waters, and that is 1.5 miles from our working pad surface. Next, I would like to cover some best management practices that aim to minimize, eliminate cumulative impacts associated with this development. Crestone was able to secure the necessary power to energize the drilling and production equipment using utility power, which is a top of the line best management practice that eliminates noise and emissions normally associated with internal combustion engines that are traditionally used to energize the rig and production equipment. In addition, Crestone will also be utilizing a quiet completion fleet to further reduce noise impacts to nearby receptors. To minimize light impacts, Crestone will monitor lights during operations to make sure there is no obtrusive light leaving the location, as well as work with our neighbors to reasonably and safely relocate lights that may be causing an issue. Next, I would like to cover the infrastructure and local traffic dust mitigation measures that Crestone will utilize. We plan on utilizing a temporary lay flat water pipeline to bring water to location for completion operations, as well as an oil pipeline to pipe oil off location, greatly reducing truck traffic and associated emissions. Operator investigated the possibility of a produced water pipeline, but due to the lack of infrastructure nearby, it was determined that it would cause more cumulative impacts than the small amount of truck traffic to haul water off the pad. In addition, Crestone coordinated the access road and haul route with Weld County to utilize County Road 49, a paved high-capacity county highway. We also implement an access road maintenance program to minimize dust during production operations, install our facilities with secondary containment that is composed of steel walls and a seamless spray-on liner. Security is of the utmost importance to Crestone, which is why we have daily site monitoring with automated remote controls and shutdown capacity. Now I'd like to cover some air and odor mitigation practices that will be utilized for the proposed development. Crestone will utilize a maintenance vessel instead of a tank to minimize, eliminate venting or flaring during maintenance operations, as well as tank blowers, also known as a tank vapor recovery system. This tank vapor recovery system operates by recycling the tank flash or working and breathing vapors back into the sales gas system that would otherwise have been sent to an enclosed combustion device. During periods where this system is operational, we calculate zero emissions from the tanks or 100% tank vapor control, which is huge in reducing emissions from this location. During pre-production operations, an air monitoring plan will be developed and approved by CDPHE and will utilize top-notch best management practices, including routing our flowback through permanent production facilities, allowing for greater emission control and utilizing drilling fluids with low to negligible aromatic content. Now onto the beneficial impacts resulting from our proposed development. Crestone plans to plug 11 wells and associated tank batteries as a result of our development. All 11 wells and associated tank batteries that will be reclaimed are within 2,000 feet of a residential building unit. Along with these wells, approximately 4,900 linear feet of flow lines will be removed, and an additional 1 acre of access road will be reclaimed. Obviously dependent on surface owner requests regarding those access roads. If we factor in the permanent DA of the proposed location and the 6 acres of estimated oil and gas operations that will be reclaimed, approximately 0.68 acres of land will be reclaimed back to original surface uses. Before I hand you back over to Nathan to finish up our presentation, I would like to cover the lesser impact area exemption. In an effort to be thorough, transparent, and protective of health, safety, welfare, and the environment, Crestone submitted all the required plans in lieu of requesting lesser area impact exemptions for some of the nuisance impacts, despite being greater than 1/2 mile from the nearest residential building unit. Thank you, commissioners. I will hand you back over to Nathan to finish up the slides.
Thank you, Jeff. As there is often questions as to why tanks are required when a location is serviced by oil pipeline, I'd like to talk through the following slide. Notably, the need for oil tanks when a location is serviced by oil pipeline comes down to a few key variables. The design of the oil pipeline system. Was the system designed to service a single operator, or was the intent to service multiple operators? Generally, when a system is intended to service multiple operators, the requirement to meet pipeline spec oil falls to the upstream operator. Variable number 2, the point of liquids stabilization. Which party, the operator or the midstream provider, has the responsibility to stabilize the oil? These are often strict conditions of the contracts executed between producer and transporter and are indeed enforceable. A system designed to serve multiple operators customarily puts this responsibility on the upstream operator, and tanks serve an extremely important role in this. In short, tanks serve as a pressure regulator. That is, an operator needs to meet a certain range of parameters to produce into an oil pipeline. These include specifications such as flowing or atmospheric pressure, Reid vapor pressure, a measure of volatility, and true vapor pressure, which is a measure of equilibrium between vapor and liquid. In this instance, the stabilized liquids, or quote, dead oil, is transported to an oil gathering terminal and prepared for regional distribution. By contrast, in a system intended to service a single operator, liquids stabilization occurs at the centralized stabilization facility, not on the well pad. The centralized facility has the obligation to stabilize the liquids and ensure they meet the requirements of the regional distribution system. It is important to note that the illustrations on this slide are simplified and were intended to summarize the major differences between oil gathering systems. I would be remiss if I did not mention that high vapor pressure oil gathering systems, or those that enable a tankless well pad, are the exception, not the rule. While there are a few in the DJ Basin, to the best of my knowledge, these systems were designed by the midstream provider in conjunction with a single upstream operator, and as a result of common ownership that existed at the time of design and construction. Lastly, we did receive 2 commissioner questions prior to this hearing. I'll address them in the following order. In response to a commissioner question related to tank count, I'd like to submit that extraction follows the Air Quality Control Commission storage tank and vapor control systems guidelines. Tank counts and capacity is an ongoing part of that evaluation. Should tank capacity reduction become an option while still maintaining the design, operation, and maintenance of the vapor control system, Crestone will evaluate removing storage tanks if it does not conflict with facility design for air pollution controls. The other question Crestone received was in relation to ozone action days. Specifically, is the operator willing to add the standard language relative to high ozone days as a COA or BMP on the OGDP? The answer is yes. Crestone agrees to follow the additional ozone mitigation measures as feasible on forecasted ozone action days. Those include the minimization of vehicle and engine idling, the reduction of truck traffic and worker traffic, postponement of the refueling of vehicles, postponement of construction activities, rescheduling non-essential operational activities such as pigging, well unloading, and tank cleaning, and the postponement of flowback if emissions cannot be adequately captured with a vapor recovery unit. And I stress, as in the past, we employ these BMPs as feasible and when possible. Further, Crestone's parent company, Civitas Resources, commits to reducing ozone season commuter traffic by evaluating and implementing an ozone season policy that allows office employees to telecommute whenever possible. In summary, on behalf of Crestone, we thank you for the opportunity to present our application today. We believe the Shelton CPR 25 pad oil and gas location is protective of the public health, safety, welfare, environment, and wildlife resources. The Shelton pad has favorable local government disposition, as noted by Mr. Maxey's comments. Further, the Shelton OGDP is supported by Director Murphy's September 23rd recommendation for approval. We believe that the best management practices that we've included in our application are intended to avoid, minimize, and mitigate temporary impacts to the surrounding environment. And lastly, Crestone Peak respectfully requests approval from the Commission on the Shelton 465 West OGDP. Thank you for your time today. Myself and my colleagues are available for questions should you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I appreciate the presentation. At this time, I would ask that you stop the screen share so that I can see everybody a little bit better. Thank you. Okay, so to my fellow commissioners, do we have questions? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this application and presentation. In my opinion, this is an excellent application and was a great presentation. I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I do have a couple of questions associated with the presentation and then a couple others. One point that came up was the point of produced water trucking and the assessment that it would be more disturbance to create some kind of a pipeline than the small amount of truck traffic, I think were the words. Can you expand on that? I think what I dug out was 12 trucks a day, but that's during the drilling and completion phase. And then I wasn't quite sure what that truck traffic would look like throughout the production phase. So can you expand on that just a little bit?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman, for your question, and I'll ask Mr. Annable to help supplement my response. In reviewing the location relative to existing produced water takeaway, it's important to note that there is no existing pipeline system for the transportation of produced water from this location or locations proximal to our location to a commercial disposal facility or other end use. Mr. Annable, help me out here, but I believe the closest permitted commercial disposal facility is somewhere west of 4 miles from this location. Is that correct, Jeff?
That's correct, and it crosses that high priority habitat as well.
And so when you contemplate developing a produced water pipeline system for this location, calculate the best in terms of distance, straight line distance, if you could get from your path to that facility, you're talking about at least 4 miles long by roughly 20 feet wide disturbance area necessary to construct that infrastructure to move what is a rather low water cut from the production of these wells. As has been stated in applications that have come before this, The water production in the DJ Basin is relatively low compared to other unconventional plays in the U.S. onshore arena. And the justification, if you will, for the disturbance and the capital expense for developing produced water takeaway systems is often outweighed by, the most common solution, and that's trucking that water from the location to those end facilities. As it relates to truck trips, the initial water cut. So once the wells are put on production, the highest water, I'm getting my words twisted here. Once the wells are turned to production, we will see the highest water recovery in that first 6 to 9 months, and it drops off precipitously afterwards. And so although I don't have the exact truck counts in front of me, be reasonable to assume that you could expect a half dozen or so trucks per day for the first couple months. And then that ultimately reduces to 1 or 2 trucks every couple of days as these wells, get into their productive life. And I'd encourage any of my peers to supplement my answer or make any corrections to something I may have misstated.
Any follow-up,
you.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I appreciate that and appreciate the thought that went into that, and that it demonstrates some of the difficulties we have without midstream systems completely in place. But appreciate the thought that went into that, and I appreciate the explanation. It kind of dovetails into my next question, and we often as a commission talk about the words as feasible or when possible, which were both brought up during this application, and I'm sure are in the notes of my fellow commissioners as well. I think, at least from my perspective as a commissioner, I understand from a perspective of an operator that life happens. Sometimes things happen. We have to deal with things as they happen. My understanding from your presentation is that you will do everything that you can to plan around ozone non-attainment days and not do the operations that you've talked about there. But when the words as feasible or when possible are in there, it really does create an environment from a regulatory perspective that has, really no standing or no teeth. And so would you be amenable to the words rather than as feasible or when possible, where those apply to BMPs, limiting those to exigent circumstances or, emergency type operations that need to take place during those days?
Thank you again, Commissioner Ackerman, for your question. As I understand your question, and forgive me if I'm misinterpreting it, it is extremely difficult for our industry to commit to 100% usage, for lack of a better word, of some of these ozone action day BMPs. And here's the reason why. So much of what we do is sequential in nature, and more importantly, involves the protection of, most importantly, the stakeholders in the communities around us, but also our employees and contractors on site. And so to give you an example, albeit a theoretical one and perhaps one that is a worst case example, when you look at postponement of refueling of vehicles, for example, if you're in the middle of an operation that requires a piece of equipment to be refueled, and that could be a piece of equipment being used during drilling operations, piece of equipment being used during completion operations. And let's for a second say that there is an ozone action day, right? And so those protocols typically go into place. The recommendation is 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. You lay off these, stay away from doing certain things, mowing your lawn, exercising outside, whatever the case may be. If we were to have an ozone trigger and we were in the middle of an operation that required the refueling of a vehicle for the safety of the people on site to continue those operations, that's something that we need to do. We can't, for example, say, well, we're not going to refuel this engine that's powering this piece of equipment on this drilling rig, which in this case is a bad example since we are using an electrified drilling rig. But I think you get my point. You can't just flip a switch and stop your operation while you're in the middle of it, because there are undoubtedly a number of safety issues that could arise as a result of an abrupt stop. I hope I'm doing a decent job of addressing your question. Our point is, that we do things the way we do them and do them in a manner where safety is of utmost importance. And just like driving on the interstate, if you slam on your brakes because you think you see something up a mile ahead, you could cause a chain reaction behind you. That analogy does apply in some instances to what we do here. And so I guess that's a long way of saying that we're unable to commit to, an outright, we will not do these things on these such and such days due to those operational considerations that I attempted to address.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I appreciate that response, and you certainly did address my question, and I appreciate that very much. What I heard in your response, I think, is what I'm getting at as well, which is I believe what you're saying, and that what other operators say when we talk about as feasible and when possible, is that they're making a good faith effort to only use those, to only undertake those operations really when there are safety concerns or in other exigent circumstances. And so I'll leave this here, but I do think that as a group, we should consider moving away from the words when possible and as feasible. I don't think they really represent, although they do provide the flexibility that Mr. Bennett described and then the necessary flexibility that Mr. Bennett described. I do think we should ponder a little bit how to move into language that more appropriately captures the intent, both from the operator standpoint and at least from my standpoint, which is that there is some degree of exigency or safety issue that would trigger those operations taking place during non-attainment days. And that's just a comment. So thank you, Mr. Bennett. I appreciate the conversation very much. My final comment, Mr. Chair, if I may, is there was a stipulation in this application that committed to avoid vegetative removal during ground nesting migratory bird season from April 1 to August 31. And in the same vein, it also had a secondary commitment that said, well, if we can't do that, then we will haze birds out of there. And then a tertiary commitment saying, if we don't do anything else, we will do a ground nesting bird survey. Can you talk a little bit more about, are the planned operations for vegetative removal outside of that time period? Are they scheduled for outside of that time period? And what would cause them to bleed into that time period? Is that something that you have at the top of your head?
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. I may ask Mr. Annable to speak to our proposed construction timeline relative to that timeframe you just cited.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Right now, as of now, we are looking to construct this pad in a couple weeks. I'd have to look at that ground nesting timeline. Again, I believe we are outside of it. Trying to pull it out. Forgive me.
No, it was a spot question. Thank you.
But as we've commented on other pads and applications, we do perform as standard practice. We have a wildlife biologist go out to the location and review the location and surrounding area to make sure there have been no nesting birds that come or ground nesting birds as well. And we fully intend on doing that with this pad to make sure that that is not the case.
Thanks, Mr. Annabelle. What I would prefer to see as a BMP here, rather than just the second approach is hazing, is the commitment, as you've committed here, to avoid vegetative removal between April 1st and August 31st. And if it does become, again, exigently necessary to conduct those operations in that time period, I think an appropriate secondary BMP would then be an independent survey for ground nesting birds in the affected area, and then avoidance of that area should ground nesting migratory birds be found.
I'll defer to Nathan on the commitment to that, but I don't see any issues with that. I believe as of right now, we're planning outside construction outside of that time frame.
Thanks, Jeff. Mr. Annable is correct with his statement, Commissioner Ackerman, and that is a BMP that Crestone is willing to commit to for this location.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And again, I wanted to reiterate that I thought this was a very well done application. I think a lot of thought went into avoiding, minimizing, and even negating the need to really mitigate any impacts. And so thank you for your work on this. And those are all my questions and comments for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that discussion. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the application. Commissioner Ackerman, appreciate your questions there, and I appreciate the applicant's response to those questions. I might surprise you guys here a little bit, but I think that response to Commissioner Ackerman's questions and really nitpicking on, not nitpicking, but really having just a few minute adjustments that need to happen to this application is a good example of what a good application is. And so I want to commend you, and I want to commend the staff for the quality of application that was provided here, the clarity and the information that was provided. The application told a story, it told a narrative. It was clear to me as I was reading the application what was being proposed here, what the expectations for the operator were, what you were planning on doing, and how you were meeting and in many ways exceeding the regulatory requirements of our rules. And so there's a lot of talk about what does it take in order to meet the regulatory requirements of the COGCC, and in many ways this is it. You've gone above and beyond in a lot of ways in this particular situation, not just doing whatever is necessary to barely meet the requirements of the rules, but really honoring the spirit and intent of the rules to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, wildlife, resources, and going above and beyond in a lot of circumstances with some of the technology, BMPs, and siting that you've proposed here. So, I think that this is an example of what it means to be a strong Colorado operator, Colorado applicant in this particular situation. And so I just want to take a second to commend you on that. So, and to commend staff, because I know it's a partnership between the operator and staff in order to get the application to us in the quality that it was in. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner.
Further questions for the panel? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and agree with everything that my fellow commissioners have said. So I'm hoping that you're open to us adding the BMP about high ozone days. And to Commissioner Ackerman's point, maybe we can come up with some better language where there's an understanding that we know that that when feasible means more than just when I feel like it, which I think is what we're trying to get at here. And then the second piece, again, I appreciate the slide about the tanks. I know I've been asking about them a lot and wondering if we can add some BMP language about making sure that when production starts reducing, you all revisit whether or not you need that number of tanks. And I think that's what I heard you say in your presentation anyway, but I would like that reflected in the application.
Commissioner McGowan, we will certainly include a BMP on the reassessment of tanks once the location has been put into production. And we will work with staff to develop some mutually acceptable language around the ozone action day requirement that you mentioned as well. I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Further questions? Moving to deliberations, does a commissioner desire to provide a motion?
I'll move approval of the application with the additions that were deliberated on around ozone days, working with staff to develop language around ozone days, the wildlife BMPs around migratory birds, and am I missing anything?
The tanks, the consideration of reduction of tanks.
Consideration of the reduction of tanks.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Messner, second by Commissioner Cross. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Fulcher. Thank you to the panel. Thanks for bearing with over a day and a half of work here. The OGDP is approved.
Thank you very much, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, I believe that concludes the agendized business for us this week. Does anybody have anything remaining? Seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Cross, second by Commissioner McGowan to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying adjourn. All right, motion carries. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.